Today is July 27th, 2016. Kay Wagner, Foundation Archivist, is talking with Dr. Mark Connelly, a retired facial plastic surgeon and past chairman of the Gunderson Medical Foundation. He joined Gunderson Health System in 1977 and retired in 2013 with a accumulation of 36 years of service.
That's right.
Welcome, Dr. Connelly. We're pleased to have you here.
Well, thank you, Kay. It's fun to come back and share some remarkable experience with you.
Wonderful. We'll start with your family life and your growing up years in Dubuque, Iowa, I believe.
Well, that's right. Ginny and I went to the same high school. Got married right out of high school and just celebrated 55 years together, which I think is remarkable. Went through college and medical school and residency together, and then residency up here, and 2 years in the Navy. We're in Charleston, South Carolina. You're here back now, yeah? And we've been back to Charleston a lot. We have 4 children, 11 grandchildren, ages 26 down to 4. So we've been busy.
And when you were growing up in Dubuque, what did your parents do for a living? Or
My father was a dentist in Dubuque. His brother was a physician, ear, nose, and throat otolaryngologist. They had moved to Dubuque from Springfield. He was Irish. My mother was Irish, almost 100%. Her name was Sullivan. And they got married and had 3 children, 2 daughters, and 11 years later along came Marky. I love to tell this story because my mother was quite ill with heart disease from the flu epidemic of 18 and 1819. And so she was 42 years old when I was born. My father, as a dentist, used to take care of all the nuns in Dubuque for free. And there are a lot of nuns in Dubuque, mother house of a lot of different orders. So when I was born in Mercy Hospital, my father went to the head of the hospital and said, "Sister, what would you think if Mark stayed in the hospital for 4 or 6 weeks while Ruth had a chance to recover her health?" And the head of the hospital said, "Considering what you've done for all of us nuns in the city, that's a fair thing to do." So I spent my first month as a perfectly healthy child in the hospital, and the nuns took care of me, and my mom had a chance to recover her health. I don't think you could do that nowadays. But it was the old system. My dad did that a lot of bartering. You know, he knew people were limited means. They couldn't pay to have fillings done and things like that, so he'd do it for some groceries or maybe a side of beef for a big thing. And it's a different time to practice of dentistry.
And your mother recovered from her illness?
She died when I was 19 or 20, but no, she was sick most of the time.
And your sisters, what did they go on to do?
My oldest sister became a dietitian, and she lived in Rhode Island. And the next sister was a teacher in the Dubuque system for her whole life, and then stayed in Dubuque and stayed at the family home. They're both deceased now.
Any other memories of growing up? Any challenges, good times, memories of high school, that type of thing?
Oh, I suppose everybody has good time memories of high school. That's where I met Jeannie, and we became an item, and we're, as I said, still together. And we're going back next month to our 55th year high school reunion. There were about 400 in our high school class. It's a new high school at the time, and you lose track of a lot of them. So this over the years, and some are deceased now, and some of my best friends are now deceased. But we're going to go back and enjoy that. But Dubuque was a nice place to grow up and raise a family early on because we had children when we went to medical school down in Iowa. Stayed at Iowa for the 4 years, and then came up here for 2 years as a resident in surgery, and then went back to Iowa for further training, and then back to La Crosse. Well, 2 years in the Navy before that.
And it sounds like you enjoyed Charleston.
We enjoyed Charleston very much. Now, it was a typical thing. I joined the Navy the day I started medical school, because Vietnam was just getting started, and I thought they were going to take all doctors. so I might as well join. And my criteria for the Navy were two. I liked their uniform, and I thought no matter where I go, they'll put me on a coast. It never occurred to me that I could actually go on a ship because I get seasick. And the reason I felt that way was I knew by the time with my specialty, the specialty I had, I'd be stationed at a hospital. So when it came time to put down where I wanted to go, I put down all West Coast hospitals, and so they sent me to Charleston, South Carolina. Turned out to be a great duty assignment, and I love the military. I'm the greatest people in the world in the military. Some are still friends that I kept in contact with, but talk about people having your back. Those are military people. And as I look back, I could have made the Navy a career. I really enjoyed it. Those 2 years.
Why didn't you?
Oh, this place called Gunderson got involved early on. And after my 2 years here and back to residency at Iowa, I kept in close contact with Tex Carlson in particular about how we were doing, and Tex was very good to me when I was down there, and then I had met John Clemens and Larry Severide, Dr. John Clemens and Dr. Larry Severide. My first introduction to Gunderson was when Ed Overholt would come around, and he had a circuit and he'd go give lectures, and that's where I learned about Gunderson. And then I wanted to apply. I'm a facial plastic surgeon, but my background was in ear, nose, and throat and otolaryngology, and facial plastic surgery is a subdivision of that. I wanted to get into the Iowa program because at that time it was considered the best program in the country for that type of training. The chief of the program said, well, if you want me to even consider you for this residency, we have to go up to Gunderson. And I had known a little bit. I said, well, what's so special about it? He said, well, I met these two Gunderson brothers, Sig and Otto. There's nothing like them. I never met any surgeons like that before, ever. And so, and the other reason is John Clemens, one of my trainees, is up there. So you can spend time with him before you come back to the university. And if you do that, I will consider you for a residency spot. And he said, by the way, he said, you'll learn more from Otto and Sig Gunderson than you could ever learn in 2 years staying at the university. Because the university, if you're 2 years as a general surgery resident, you'll be down the line holding retractors. But with those two, you'll be across the table from learning things and doing things. And that's exactly the way it turned out to be. Well, it was during that time that I got to know John Clemens really well, and he became a hero to me. I don't think I've seen anybody that had a finer hands and a better sense of operating in the middle ear than John Clemens. He was like a master. He kind of took me under his wing at the time. So that's one of the reasons I came up here. And of course, it was 2 years behind him was Larry Severide, the same program. So Larry came up here, so it was a natural for me to come up here. So that's how I ended up at Gunderson. I did get in the Iowa program. In fact, I was sitting at John Clemens' house that day when I got the letter of acceptance, and John and I had some adult beverages as well as our wives to celebrate the moment. So,
Dr. Clemens talks about the time when the fellow got his ear bit off downtown at a pizza place and called you to come over and assist him with the...
I'll never forget it. You know, I'm sure he told you the guy came in and had his ear in a little bag and said, why can't you sew it on? He sew fingers on. Well, nobody had ever done that before, except for the Lord, when the ear was smit off by the high priest and he put it back on. And the funny thing, when we wrote that all up, I said, John, we got to put the quote in there about smitting off the ear, because you have pictures of it being done before and after. The Lord didn't have any pictures. You know? He said, oh, that's blasphemy. And no, but we did put it in he did put it in the article. But in the middle of the night, we're trying to decide, because the ear is lying there. I'm sure you've seen a picture of the whole ear. And I said, well, let's call Bernstein. Bernstein was our professor back at Iowa in the middle of the night. He was a facial plastic surgeon in the department. So we called Bernstein at 2 or 3 in the morning, told him what was going on, and should we put it back on or not? And Bernstein said, go ahead and put it on. And I would suggest that you heparinize the patient. Okay. And then we did, and then the next day, you may know all this, John, when he took the dressings off, noticed that fresh blood from the heparin from preventing coagulation was coming through the teeth bite marks. And that's what was keeping the ear going. So John decided, okay, I'll take a blade, a number 11 blade, and make marks all over the whole ear, right through and through. And the whole ear started to bleed. Well, it bled so much, we had to transfuse the patient. But the ear survived. And that became the standard, the Clemens technique for putting ears back on. This was before the days of microsurgery and all of this. So, but so it was a combination. Bernstein, our professor, had a hard time calling it the Clemens technique. He wanted to call it the Bernstein technique because he gave some advice on it. So it was funny, you know. But well, that's how I ended up here, and I've never looked back. It was a wonderful career. People were good to me. I think I mentioned to you one of those was not only John, but Adolf and I became very close.
And then you told a story at one time about getting a loan when you first moved here, I think, from somebody offered to loan you the money for your house. Wasn't that it?
Yeah, it's a great story. When we came here, we came right out of the Navy, so we didn't have much money. We hadn't sold the house yet in South Carolina. It didn't sell for a year, and we had bought it because we thought it'd be great resale value. Never sold. So we came here and we didn't have any money for a down payment. And our realtor at the time, we were getting it through Gerard Realty, and so she said, I want you to meet Mr. Gerard. So I went in, introduced myself, and sat down with Bill Gerard, and he said, I understand you don't have any money for that house, or very little. And I said, yeah, that's right. It's okay, I'll sign for you. And his name was on our house, signing to buy the house for 10 years. And I never forgot that act of kindness. You know, a total stranger to the man. And as I walked out the door that day, he said, you're a good risk. I know where you work. So he was good. And the other person that was good to us was Bill from State Bank. Bill Barney from State Bank was very good. So and we ended up living just down the street from Bill and Ann, and they became close friends. People were very helpful to us. It still was in those days where you go in and ask for something, and you really didn't have a handshake. We never had any handshakes in the clinic when we started. Not a handshake, it was just a handshake and somebody's word. There was no contracts when I came here from the clinic. It was just say, well, you're coming back and we'll see you. Then I don't know if they do that now. I suspect now there's contracts and everything else. But not then. It was just a handshake, particularly with Tex Carlson. He gave you his word on something. It was his word. So.
How did you decide to become a physician? Did you know early on that that's what you wanted to do?
I'll answer it two ways. Yes, in the sense that I always knew my mother was sick. And I always thought early on, 12, 13, and 14, maybe I could become a physician. And my dad really pushed me along those lines. He was a dentist, but he thought I should become a physician. So, and then the reason that I ended up doing the special AM with facial plastics was at Bernstein. Dr. Bernstein, I was at my junior year, third year medical school, and I was rotating through the otolaryngology department. At that time at Iowa, there was no plastic surgery department. All plastic surgery, the head and neck, was done in ear, nose, and throat, including all the cleft lip and palate. And Bernstein did all cleft lip and palate surgery and facelifts and all that. And he was giving a lecture one day to the residents, or 20 residents. It was just the 20 residents and me, a medical student. So I'm sitting there, and he wasn't getting his point across when he was trying to teach the residents something. And he was a wonderful, beautiful artist. I didn't know that. Well, he stepped to the blackboard with some chalk, and he just sketched what he was trying to teach. And I was just blown away. I thought, okay, I always wanted to be a surgeon. Now I know what I want to do. Literally walked out of the lecture hall, waited a while, and knocked on the door and introduced myself and said, I want to do what you do. And he said, come in. So I went in and he said, sit down, and he said, where are you at in your class? And I said, well, I'm not in the top, I'm not in the bottom, probably in the upper 2/3. And then he didn't say anything for a long time. And I'm thinking to myself, well, that does that. I might as well get up and leave. He said, how'd you like to work on me on your last year on a research project? I said, oh, I'd love it. What we're going to do? He said, well, I want to do some work that would relate to cleft lip and palate on dogs. And so I jumped at that opportunity, worked with him on all during the year. We became good friends. He was there and when I came back for the first 2 years, and then he left Iowa and took over as chairman of a program out in California. So now I lost Bernstein. Bernstein wasn't there to be my professor, but he recruited another a general plastic surgeon, not just facial, general, who, do we have enough time for all this?
Yes.
I'll tell you the story.
Yes.
It's a fascinating story.
Yes.
He comes to replace Bernstein at Iowa, and his name is Janusz Bardak. So here I am, as Irish as you can be. Bernstein, Jewish as you can be. Bardak, Jewish. And both of them took me under their wings. Well, how did Bardak get there? Because Bardak was from Poland. Bardak met Bernstein at a meeting in London, and they became friends. And Bernstein would say, why don't you come on a sabbatical and spend time in Iowa City? And he kept saying to him. Bardak kept saying, no, I don't want to do that. Well, Bardak's history is fascinating. Maybe I told this one to Jay, but Bardak, Polish Jew, his father was a dentist. They were quite wealthy at the time. The Nazis were about to overrun their town in Poland. So Bardak had just gotten married, his wife was pregnant, and he decides to go fight against the Nazis. He made a terrible mistake. He chose to go fight with the Russians. So he and his best friend crossed the border into Russia to fight. They left his mother, his father, his sister, and his pregnant wife in the front yard. They put him in charge of driving a new Russian T-tank. And he wasn't very good at it, and he got stuck in the mud. Now the Russians are afraid the Germans are going to overrun them, and they'll get the hardware of that new tank. So the punishment is death. So Bardak had just gotten done digging his own grave. And they're going to shoot him and execute him. And out of nowhere in this camp comes a guy in a Jeep, another Russian officer who outranked everybody. He said, what's going on? And they said, this guy got the tank, we're going to execute him. What's his name? Bardak. Bardak? Send him into my tent. So he goes in, he said, tell me about your family, Bardak. And he did, including the fact that his uncle was a major in the Russian army out of Moscow. And then you think, oh no, they'll go after my uncle, they'll kill him now too. He gets all done, and this guy says, Bardak, you told me the truth. I grew up next door to your uncle. He's a good man. That's why the name Bardak interests me. He said, I can send you outside and let you die. I can send you to the front. You'll be dead in 4 or 5 days. Or I can send you to the gulags in Siberia. You may have a chance. 6 years later, he got out of the gulags. He comes back to his hometown, and his whole family had been executed. He went to medical school in Moscow. He came back, he becomes a plastic surgeon, rises up in the ranks, has his own hospital, his own residence, and becomes a world-famous surgeon, plastic surgeon. And he meets Bernstein, and they become friends. And he married again. The woman he married was 10 years younger. So he used to go on these sabbaticals. He'd go for a month, and and this was the height of the Cold War. And he would always come back. He'd go away for a month to some other country, come back. He always came back because now he had attained a bit of wealth within the communist system. His daughter was 14, his wife is doing well, and they've got a very nice home. So Bernstein says, come to Iowa City. And he does. And he's only there a week, and he goes to Brian McCabe, our chairman, and says, I want to defect. I got to get out of there, and you've got to get my wife and my daughter out. So McCabe, the chairman of the department, working behind the scenes with the State Department, convinced the Polish communist to let his wife and his daughter come over and visit him during the sabbatical. The communists thought, well, he always comes back. He's got a nice life here. He'll come back. No way. Once he got his daughter, 14, and his wife out, and they got to Iowa City, they were staying. And then McCabe, not only that, McCabe went to the Iowa legislature and got him a license to practice medicine because he wouldn't be able to pass all the board exams and all that. So the legislature unanimously gave him a license to practice at the university hospitals. That's how he ended up at Iowa City. His wife, after 2 years, decided she didn't like Iowa City. She wanted to go home. She's 10 years younger. She goes home and died in 2 weeks. Executed by the communists as an example of defectors. So he lost his second spouse to totalitarian regimes. So the story continues. So he comes up, spends time, and I got to work with him a lot, and we became friends. And he would come up here to see John Clemens. He'd go fishing up at John's cabin. But he goes back to Iowa City, and he married again for the third time, a woman from the Writers' Workshop. And Jeannie and I were down there one time visiting, and we went to a little pub that all the people from the workshop went to, just packed with people, and I spied him sitting across from me. We jumped up, embraced in the middle of all these people, and he had just written his book about his life called Man as Wolf to Man, Life in the Gulags and How He Survived. And his new wife was with him. I said, this is a kind of a story that Spielberg should make a movie out of, how he survived all this and all of this. She said, oh, when do you like it now that he's finally, I'll get a copy of the book if you'd like it.
Interesting to read.
Yeah. So we get all done, and that was the last time I really saw him. Well, our daughter Kathleen, Katie, goes to Iowa City for nursing school, for undergraduate and then nursing. She called me one day in one of our last years. She said, Dad, you aren't going to believe this. Dr. Bardock just came in. He's really sick. And I'm taking care of him as a student. I said, oh, Katie, you got to tell him who you are. Oh, I already have, Dad. He knows that Mark's daughter is going to be taken care of. Well, he had pancreatic cancer and didn't survive. But the story of what that man went through. So I had this spot in my heart for Bernstein and Bardock, who took an Irish guy under their wing and taught him an awful lot of stuff. Bardock in a lot of the reconstructive aspects, because he had taken care of so many war injuries of the face from World War II, is an absolute expert at it. And cleft lip and palate surgery, he has a whole textbook of cleft lip and palate surgery. So I did his operations a lot, and I still was only one of the people in the country that was doing the Bardock operation for later reconstruction of the upper lip and nose. And I'm teaching it to Ryan Mentz, who's here now. So, well, I kind of blabbered along a lot about
very
that.
Interesting.
So,
And one of my other questions is, who you considered a mentor, and it sounds as if one or both of these men might have served that role.
yeah, they sure did, along with John Clemens, of course, and Larry Severide. We had a dynamite otolaryngology department, just dynamite. It couldn't be touched quality-wise. It was as good as any university otolaryngology department. And then one day, I'd been here only about 5 or 6 years, and Sig Jr., who was running things, said, Mark, I've decided we're going to get a general plastic surgeon. I said, I'm just building my practice as a facial plastic surgeon. Mark, it's time, and we need a general plastic surgeon. But you can form the new department, and you can choose who you want to have. I said, okay. So we started. The first person we interviewed was Lynn Martin. And Lynn was a otolaryngologist. And so he's boarded in that. Then he went and took his residency in Madison in general plastics, and he's boarded in that. So he applies for the job. He'd also been here as an intern, so we knew him. So I called him one day and I said, okay, Lynn, why don't you come join me and we'll form a new department of plastic surgery. I'll be the chairman, you can be the vice chairman. There was a long pause. He said, why don't we make it a co-chair and I'll come. And I said, done. And that's how the Department of Plastic Surgery was formed. He said, no. And Lynn was a great surgeon as well. I learned a lot from him. So, yeah, that's why I said it was a great place. Any surgeon operating in the operating room, sometimes word goes out if you're having a difficult case. I was having a difficult case one day in a big cancer case, and I sent word out, could anybody over in the clinic come over and scrub with me a little while? Every one of my partners showed up within a half an hour. every one of them except for one who was on vacation. So we took a picture in the operating room, and I thought, this is really impressive. You know, you can't do this in private practice. Only does Gunderson have the ability to let people just come and join you in a situation like that. Who benefits the most? The patient. But they don't even know all these people came together. And then we'd flip a coin and say, which one are we going to do? You know, no, no, that was good. So if you ask me who was my greatest influence, I really can't say, other than what I've already talked about, the names I've mentioned. Other people, of course, in the organization influenced me in a greater way. Sig Gunderson Jr., Eric. Eric was one of the first people I was assigned to when I came here, and he taught me some things. He taught me a particular way to suture and close that I taught ever since. And I always say to people, Eric Gunderson taught me to do it this way, so I'm teaching you how to do it, because it was a superb way to close the skin. Learned a lot from Adolf, mostly from dealing with people, because I didn't scrub too much with Adolf. But that Adolf's relationship and my relationship with him was a whole other wonderful story. So, where else now, Kay?
Well, the next question was about how you heard about Gunderson, so we've talked about that. And I also had a note to myself about the chair that said, you know, you'll have more experience, you'll get better experience going up to Gunderson and you know, being across from the operating table. Do you remember how many clinicians were here when you joined the clinic?
53.
53. And what was your number?
Because I think my number was, no, there's 51. My number was 52.
Okay.
It was, yeah, and it stayed that way. You know, there weren't a lot.
No.
There weren't a lot, but enjoyed a good reputation.
Was it a challenge to be a non-Gunderson?
No, I never felt that because I wasn't a Gunderson. No, I think that all people out of medical school, when they came here, they were treated as a equal, you know, right away. They weren't. The role was different than being a medical student, and you were certainly treated better than being a resident in a university system. Here, you were respected. It was a good feeling and the right way to do things. Oh, I met my first day in the ward. Do you remember Mrs. Lawson? Mm-hmm. Miss Lawson. My first day in the ward was with Mrs. Lawson, and I have a hard time calling her by her first name. And I think I know I was going to be an Adolf. I was assigned to Adolf, and I got there early around 6 o'clock, and I introduced myself to her and said, Mrs. Lawson, I'm Mark Connelly. I just finished medical school, and I've got a lot of book knowledge, etc., but I need some more clinical knowledge. Can you make me look good with Dr. Adolf? And she had a wonderful smile, just a delightful smile. She said, let's make rounds together. I mean, this is unheard of nowadays, where the head nurse would say to the intern, let's make rounds together and I'll teach you, which is what she was going to do. So we make rounds on all of Dr. Adolph's patients. And she'd say, now, this patient is at day so-and-so. Let's listen to the lungs. Okay, we'd usually change the dressing to do some things. She'd explain each patient. There were a bunch of them. I said, okay. So on the ward comes Adolf. And he said, let's make rounds. I said, okay. So take the first patient. He said, what do you think? And I just parroted everything she taught me. I said, well, it seems to me that we're at this day we ought to do this. And the look on his face was like, this is really... And Olive was standing right behind him. And she's got a smile just from ear to ear. She's just beaming. And that began a wonderful friendship. And then when she died, I had a chance to say a few words at her funeral.
Wasn't her first name Olive?
Olive. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How has your field changed over the years? What do you consider one of the biggest innovations?
Oh, I think microsurgery and the facial plastic surgery is certainly one of the biggest things that's been done. The use of the microscope, the use of microscope started with otolaryngology. It was the ear doctors that first used microscopes. In fact, the original surgeons who did, say, mastodectomies with hammer and chisel thought, oh, my eyes are good enough. I don't need a microscope to do this surgery. Well, what a bunch of baloney. It just changed everything. So the microscope was one thing, and then the microvascular surgery when that came along, enabled everything that came after that with the transplants. And a friend of mine did the first face transplant in this country at the Cleveland Clinic, and Dr. Mance trained with him.
Talk about that.
Yeah. Well, the face transplants, I was opposed to them to begin with because I thought it's a wonderful procedure if it works out right and all the things that go with it, but then those people have to take anti-rejection drugs for the rest of their life. They just have to do it. So then the first one was probably done 10, 12 years ago, and we were out at a meeting in Las Vegas, and afterwards I had a chance to have dinner with the surgeon from Paris that did the first one ever. So I learned a lot from him just listening to him. And then the first one was done at this country, the Cleveland Clinic. This is a woman whose husband at the time shot her in the face. There was another famous patient went to the Cleveland Clinic, and that was a woman that was attacked by the chimpanzee. And my friend there, who ended up training Ryan Mance, operated on this woman that was shot. She'd had multiple procedures like that, but he did the first one. And so I had dinner with him about 3 years ago over in Hawaii. He's in Hawaii now. I said, what was it like? He said, I'll tell you, when I harvested the face from the donor, and I'm carrying it across the room in my hands, I started to shake. I just started to shake. I got this person's face in my hands, and I'm going to put it on my patient over here. But he said, once he started to hook up all the blood vessels and the whole thing pinked up, it was just beautiful. So, about 3 years ago, we had an international meeting in New York, and the whole morning session was devoted to facial transplants. The fellow from France came and talked about the first one and said, her new face is starting to look like her original face. How do you explain that? Totally different person. So something's changed in this face that was donated to her. That's just remarkable. And then up gets my friend, and he talks about doing the first one in this country. He said, by the way, everybody, about 250 of us here, I want you to meet her. She came to the meeting. We're good friends now, and we have her for Christmas and Thanksgiving, and she wants to say a few words. And she came up dressed to the nines and spoke to all of us and introduced us to her new fiance. It was just the most remarkable thing you'd ever see. So is there a need for facial transplants? There certainly is, but they're so expensive that most hospitals, including the Cleveland Clinic, as I understand it, are not doing them now. They just can't afford to do it. People don't have the money. So who's paying for it now? The Army. The Army is funding it and keeping it going. And we just had you talk about a small world. We had a resident spend time when we were getting residents from Madigan. They were coming to the otolaryngology department. One of the residents that came there, and I'll have to get you his name, Kay, because it escapes me right now, but he was a physician. He came here for 3 months. He was a paratrooper, and he used to say, oh, a paratrooper, that's easy, except for jumping out of the side of the airplane at 900 feet. That's a little bit tough. I'd rather jump out the back end, because when that wind hits you, it's really something. And it was something because this guy comes, and we were saying, okay, you're going down the emergency room. Now remember, they have their ways of doing everything down there, and you're the new kid on the block. He said, I'll handle it. Well, I went with him after he'd been there a couple of times, and everybody was jumping to everything he said. It was remarkable. He had a way of dealing with people, and now he's a general. He's a general, a young general. So he comes back to give a lecture here. And he's in full dress uniform. He has 2 lieutenants with him, and they hand him all his notes and all that kind of stuff. And he came up to give us, to talk to us afterwards up in the otolaryngology department, and he had changed into kind of a Eisenhower jacket instead. And so we're talking, and I said, so, are you responsible for face transplants? He said, I am. He said, we're funding it now, and I've got a lot of soldiers coming back from Vietnam that need it. He said, we just got a fellow in last week, terrible injuries to his face. He said, I don't think the marriage is going to survive, but I can't blame his wife. She didn't sign on for something like this. Never occurred. So we've got a real need for all this. Well, I wouldn't put this in part of what we're talking about, but I said, I understand after you get done here, you're going down and meet this guy down Weber. Yes, I am, because we were interested in some business down there, and all of this. And I said, put your dress uniform back on. When you go talk to Don on that 5th floor, you'll be lucky if he's already not in his Marine uniform. You know, he's thanks for the advice, and he did, and they had a great talk, real great talk. So, small world sometimes. You know,
How many face transplants do you think are done annually?
Oh, I have no idea, Kay. But I would say probably only less than half a dozen right now. But there's a great need for them.
Mm-hmm.
But just think of it, you have to find the right donor. The first one that was done was remarkable. They found the right donor, and right after the patient died, they made a facial moulage of that person's face, then harvested the face, put the plastic face on so that they could have an open casket for the family.
Oh my gosh.
They had thought of everything that needed to be done for the donor as well. That surgeon was a remarkable surgeon, still alive, but how he handled the donor family and all of that. So you got to find the right donor family. And he showed another one. He showed a man with a terrible facial deformity at Christmas time in Paris. And there's about 50 people standing outside looking at a big, like Macy's store on the outside, and they're showing all the Christmas decorations, things like that. And all these people are there, and this fellow walks up, and they all look at him, and they all disappear. He's left standing there alone because of his horrible look of his face. Then a year later, they had him go back with his new face. Nobody paid any attention to him. You know, it's because you take these people with these terrible injuries and you allow them to get back into society again. So I had a special interest for a long time in neurofibromatosis of the face, gigantism, the elephant man.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I had one man who was just terrible deformities on the right side of his face. So I operated on him and really turned out well. We made him a prosthetic eye, and he came back and he said, "You don't know what it's like to go into a restaurant and sit down and have a meal and nobody pays any attention to you. It's like what you look like," something like that. So it's been a good specialty.
What would be the ideal donor for a face transplant? How did they match?
Well, they have to match, first of all, for blood, the usual things
Okay.
for all of that. They have to be a good genetic match, and after that, then you have to consider male to male bone structure, because it's bones, muscle, the whole thing. And the reasons they take so long, you got to put everything back together. The bone has to be plated back together, the muscles have to be sewn back, and all the nerves have to be sewn back together. And they just take an inordinate amount of time. That's why they're 24, 36 hours long. It takes a long time to do them. Long time. But we got into a lot of this on training. But you asked what was the big thing, and I think that microsurgery and the use of the microscope was certainly big, and certainly some of the imaging hardware that's available now. When I did some surgery, we didn't have the CT scans and all that that's available now. And Mrs. Reinhardt gave us this wonderful machine for doing radiation therapy, and people would at the foundation say, "Well, what can that machine do that she gave you several $1 million?" And I said, "Well, look at it this way. It can knock out a single tree in the middle of a forest during a storm. And everything else is blowing around. It's that sophisticated." That was my interpretation of how good that machine. And Marge loved it. She would tell all her friends, "You go over and have people use my machine on you for your cancer." So
Wonderful donors.
I'll say, and you meet a lot of wonderful people. We used to take those trips down to Florida, because sometimes people have a different attitude when they're away from you as far as their yeah. Okay.
That's a good segue into your work with the foundation, because you joined in 1979 and then succeeded Dr. Adolf L. as president in 1997. The assets went from 26 million to 62 million during your tenure. Tell us about all of that.
Well, as I said, Adolf and I got very close, and there was a time when I was thinking of, I was chairman of surgery in the hospital for a while. And he called me in one day and said, "I have decided that you're going to spend all your time in the foundation." I said, oh, okay, if you think that's best for me. And that's how I got into the foundation. And he said, that you'd be better for the organization if you stayed with the foundation. And I had some funny things. He was close to Donna Shalala. Shalala, is that what?
Shalala?
Shalala, yeah. I came in one day. Oh, this is and so he would come in. This was after I took over his chair, and so I would be there in the morning at 8 o'clock, sitting at this big desk of his. And he would arrive promptly at 10. And I would get up and walk around to the front, to the chair in front. He was always protesting, saying, you don't have to do that. He never did stop. He always went around and sat in his chair, and then I sat across from him and we would talk for a long time. And then one day he said, okay, I've decided that you can have the left-sided drawers. And then after a while went by, he gave me the center drawer. But he never gave me the right-sided drawer. Those were hers drawers to keep his things in. It's a private thing. So we had this, and I learned a lot from just talking from the man. And I'll never forget, one night we were walking out. It was terrible weather, and this is when he was sick. He wasn't feeling good. And some mundane subject, you probably heard the story, going to the parking lot over there, and he turned to me and just changed subjects completely. He said, Mark, you can never thank people enough for the nice things they do for you. And they give money to the foundation. I said, I won't forget that, Otto. I won't forget that. Then he went back to the other subject and started talking about other things again. So, but that's how I got into the foundation, and it turned out to be a wonderful spot for me. We had great success, but out of, I didn't have to do much, okay? He surrounded himself with really good people. You know, Phil Schumacher came and stayed with the foundation. Absolute expert in raising funds. You know, he's the expert. He goes and he was on his national and international boards, and people want him to come and give lectures on how to do it. He was really good. And Robin joined us at the time when we merged the two. The Gunderson Foundation with Lutheran Hospital Foundation, that occurred during this whole thing. That was interesting because you're bringing two foundations with different missions together. And I'm having a mental block. Who was the guy that owned all the Hardys in town? Jay, do you remember? Oh.
That wasn't on Dell, was it?
Yeah, Jess.
Oh, yeah,
Jess.
Jeff Ondell.
Jess was on the Lutheran Hospital
Mm-hmm.
Foundation. So we're going to merge the two. Well, during this whole thing then, Jess became my consigliere. He would come in and we would just talk, and he'd tell me how things were going and if there were problems moving the two boards. And see, Adolf didn't want to, when he wanted to merge the two, but he felt that whoever brings the most money, has the most assets, would have the most board members. Gunderson was bringing the most assets, so they should have more board members than Lutheran Foundation. And then Adolf stepped down and I took over, and Tom Roberts was running the Lutheran Hospital Foundation at the time, and I was now running Gunderson Foundation, and Phil Dahlberg was CEO of Gunderson. So I had him over to the house one night to talk it all over, just the three of us. And I proposed to Tom Roberts. I said, Tom, why don't we go 50-50? Adolf wanted to have more Gunderson people than Lutheran. Let's go 50-50. The only stipulation I'd make is that the Gunderson people get a chance to choose the first chairman. He said, that's fair enough for me. And that's how I ended up as chairman. So, and Dahlberg agreed with it, and that's how it happened. It was simple as that. And when you look back, you think Tom Roberts, that was a magnificent thing that he did. He was looking for the future and things like that, and it turned out to be just fine. But then when you get all these different people with different personalities and different putting it together, it wasn't always smooth. And that's where my consigliere, Jay, his name again?
Jeff Ondell.
Jeff would come in and we just sit and talk. He was a wonderful guy. He'd send me little notes at times saying, Mark, what do you think about that? Mark, yeah.
Sounds like you're a good person to bounce things off and
Yep.
probably
He was good.
Sound ahead.
So, but see, I had, well, look at all these people. Robin is still there. David Amborn came at the same time, and David hired Robin. You know, Robin started out working in the otolaryngology department.
Oh, did she?
Yeah, that's where she started working. And then she moved, and she was out and got into management out at the mall, and then David hired her, and then she came over, and of course Schumacher came back and hired other people, and we added other people over time. I'll tell you one cute story, and I'm trying to think. We were having dinner one night down at the Four Sisters, and the lady serving us is Katie Service. Katie. Yeah.
Serviais.
You know, when you get a little older, you start to get this little memory, but I'll think of a second. Anyway, she's there, and so we start talking. I said, "What would you like to do?" I said, "What are you doing?" She says, "Oh, I'm asthma teachers at Aquinas, and I'm working here. We've got a couple of little kids." I said, "Well, what would you like to do?" She said, "I'd like to be a grant writer. That's what I'd really like to be." I said, "Really?" Well, we got her in here as a grant writer. And it worked out really good for her. Now she's got her own office and she's doing other things. So you give people an opportunity. When you can do it, you open the door, and then they have to you have to walk through it. But then you meet all these other people. I met Don Weber, you know, and his good friend was our former governor, Tommy Thompson. And one of our researchers was having some trouble getting connections through the Institute of Health. So Schumacher and I and the researcher go down. We go to Tommy's office down on the 5th floor down there, and Tommy says to this guy, "Tell me about your project." And he spoke for 15 or 20 minutes, telling me about the project he was having. Trouble he was having getting a contact to NIH. Tommy says, "Okay," opens his phone and dials the head of the NIH. Said, "I got this researcher from Gunderson here. Let me tell you about his project." It was almost verbatim. It was just remarkable. He said, "Yep, here's his name. Who should he talk to?" "Okay, got it. Yep, he'll call that person to do it." "Okay, all right. I'll be back next week. I owe you dinner." Then he got off, popped up the phone, and he looked at our research and said, "I opened the door, you walk through it." And you know, those are connections. You just, it doesn't matter what political party you're at, if you've got a connection like that, it really helps. So I think I've wandered too much, Kay, on some of these things. So
next thing though is you've gotten many awards, including the Founders Award in recognition of your outstanding leadership, and that's just to name one. How much have these awards meant to you? And
well, it means a lot. They're kind of like a capstone of your career, and they're all prominently shown around our house. When you get nice things like that, it's nice to have recognition from your colleagues and your patients. Some of them are patients. They mean a lot. I just went up to the place before, and it was kind of nice to walk by that little conference room that's got the Connelly name on the door. You know, I'm going to be gone a long time, but somebody's going to maybe they'll say, "Well, who was that Connelly guy, or what did he do? You know, what's the mark you left in this place?" So other times it's marks. You've probably never heard of one of my patients named Jerry. Jerry was a cancer patient of mine. Did a lot of operations on him. I fell out of bed one day and hurt my back, and Jerry called me 2 months later and said, You haven't called me lately, Dr. Connelly." I said, "Jerry, I fell out of bed. I had to have an operation." He started to laugh. He's in his 80s. He started to laugh at me, and I said, "Jerry, it's not nice to laugh at your friend and your doctor." "Well, for crying out loud, Dr. Connelly, I fall out of bed all the time because I only got one leg. You shouldn't be falling out of bed." Well, Jerry lived down in Stoddard. And I used to tell the residents all the time when they come through, with your cancer patients or any patients, if you have an opportunity and they live within a reasonable driving distance, go see them in their home on Saturdays. Don't tell them you're coming until a half an hour ahead of time. Say, I'm passing through, can I stop by? Take a bunch of donuts with you. And what you'll find out is you'll spend about 15 minutes talking about their illness, and you'll spend an hour and a half meeting all the members of the family. And when you walk out the door, you'll say to yourself, that's why I became a doctor. That's why I decided to do this. So I would do that with Jerry. I go down and see Jerry at Stoddard. One day I went down to see him, and he said, I'm going to show you a tour of Stoddard. So he has to, with one leg, he gets in his car. It took us over an hour to tour Stoddard. We saw every nook, but he's so proud of his little town. He lived in this, all he had was a little kitchen adjoining the living room and the bathroom and the bedroom. And B, his wife, died early on, and he missed B terribly. And so one day I went down, and it was Christmas time, and he said, what's that? I said, oh, I can't help it. I was standing outside of Walgreens, and this guy in this big red suit, and he had a sleigh there, some reindeer. He said, take this to Jerry. And I had gotten all kinds of fruits and groceries and all that kind. He said, he got a tear in his eye. He said, I've got no way to pay you back. I said, you're my friend, aren't you? He said, I'm your friend. I'm your friend. I said, that's all I need, Jerry. That's all I need. And that gets back to this whole thing of why you went into this in the first place. I guess we got off to that because some of these nice awards that they've given me over the years. So
Well,
you share them with everybody, because it really is. The foundation, that was always a group effort. Jay probably knows this. I didn't write a lot of my scripts. My ghostwriter was Phil Schumacher. Phil is a wonderful wordsmith on a lot of different things. So I hated to write, and he would take care of me, and we became very good friends. And
there was an article in one of the newsletters. In 1999, you were voted the best boss in lacrosse, and the staff said in the article that because you like trains, that you were their engine, gently guiding the boxcars, the staff, along while chugging forward together.
Well, we would do things together. I appreciated them. We had pizza Fridays. We all get together, and I call down, and then I had a wonderful secretary, and she kept reminding me, okay, it's time to have another Pizza Friday. Everybody loves pizza, and they get together. And I found out people like donuts, so I'd bring donuts in, or they'd find candies or things like that. So there are little ways to reward people that they appreciate. Barb Klapir, I should have mentioned Barbara's name. Barbara's. She was just a great secretary, and never forgot anything. She just kept me on track with everything we had to do. And she's got a nice husband, Jim, and Jeannie just had her birthday, and sure enough, there's a little note from Barb. How you doing? Because she just retired too. Yeah, between Jeannie, it took a lot of people just to keep me going to the right place. Did I tell you the story of the first nurse I had threw the chart at me?
No.
Oh, Katie Schleifer. Katie was my first nurse. Fiery redhead. And we didn't get along real well to begin with the first few weeks. And patients hadn't arrived yet. We're up on the 5th floor, and we were having a discussion about something. As I turned around to walk away, I thought to I'm about 10 feet from her, I thought to myself, I may have gone a little far that time. No sooner had the thought out of my mind than the patient chart, the old paper chart, came sailing by my ear and landed on the floor in front of me and splattered all over the whole place. There were only two of us. And I looked at that. I turned around, looked at her, and we burst out laughing, embraced, and after that, everything was just smooth. Final part of the story. Then she was with me for a long time, and she left and went someplace else. We had the wine tasting thing just a month ago down at the Cargill Room. Katie's there. And I said, Katie, I haven't seen you. And so we embraced. And I said, do you ever tell people the story? You said, oh, do I ever? I'm still telling people that story. I tell them everybody that starts with a new doctor. I said, here's how you handle them. And she said, I tell them about throwing the chart at you. And it was so, because it's a real close relationship and when you're working with. And, you have to pay attention. I'll tell you, 99.9% of the patients are wonderful, but sometimes there's a stinker, and most of the time people at the front desk or your nurse will pick up on it, and especially if you're going to do cosmetic things, saying, I don't think you should operate on this person.
Really?
Yeah, don't think you should do it, and you better pay attention, because I remember one time we were going up and doing outreach up at Winona, and Katie came in and said, this guy that you're going to see, every time he comes in here, he's terrible to the people at the front desk, he's terrible to me, but when you see him, everything's just fine, everything's wonderful. I said, oh, really? So we're going to see this guy, and I said, I have good news and bad news. The good news is the problem you have, that's all stable. You know, I said, the bad news is I'm not going to take care of you anymore. He said, what? I said, no. I said, you treat the people at the front desk just awful. You treat my nurse awful. They don't deserve it. I'll bet you're the kind of a guy that when you go in the bank, everybody cringes at the counter saying, oh no, here he comes. I'll bet you do the same with the checkout line at the supermarket. I'll bet they just hate to see you come through. You're just a terrible person. They said, I'll be better, I'll be better, I'll be better. I said, I'll give you one chance. Don't ever treat the people that work with me like this again. And I have connections. I'm going to know what you're doing at the bank at the supermarket too. I don't know about that, but every time he came after that, he was just a very nice person. They just, sometimes people are stinkers and they just assume that people have to take it, and you don't.
No.
You know, you don't. You have to get them another doctor if you've been their doctor, you know, and you have to make arrangements. But if you have never taken them the first time you see somebody, you don't have to take them. It's not required. You can have an interview and say, I decided that I don't have the skill to take care of your problem. So.
Do you have a favorite story about Gunderson? Best day, worst day? Oh, patient who changed you?
Best day? It's a combination. I was doing a facelift on a woman, finishing up around 12, and it was one of the nicest ones technically I'd ever done. I was just proud as pink. And when I'm really proud like that, we'd usually dance around the operating room. I'm probably one of the only people that would finish the case, and Jackie Martin and I would put on a song and dance a little bit around. In fact, one day, Rich Olson stuck his head and said, there's too much levity coming out of this operating room. Well, there's a method to the madness. When people are relaxed, they do their best work. Then when sometimes things get critical, they do their best work because they know you're going to be relaxed and you're going to help. But so I felt really good about this facelift. I just thought, oh, this is going to be dynamite. I get a call, go down to the emergency room. We've got a little girl, 4, with a dog bite of her lip. And I go down and she's missing the whole upper part of her lip on the right side. And it was a second bite from a neighbor's dog. Took the whole lip out. And the father there, and he's in tears, and said, can't you take a piece of my lip and put that in, my little girl? I said, I just can't. All I can do it was just, so you talk about the emotions are going from something that was really nice, from helping somebody, to a little girl who was just beautiful, gorgeous eyes, and she's going to have a terrible deformity. Even with reconstruction, it's just not going to be the same. So that's why when you say, I've often said, yeah, I went from the highs to the low in one 24-hour period with 2 patients, thinking they were good. Other things, Kay, well, it was a good ride. I had wonderful support over the years from the photography department. And they were just great. We had the dean of the medical school was always on our board, and he would go through and say, we don't have any facilities like you've got. I said, I know, we've got it. So when you talk about Jay, about all this stuff, I'm sure it's going to be top notch, and the people from Madison will say, why can't we have stuff like this? But you know how we got into the business of the telemedicine and all that? That was a donor. Did you know
was
that?
It?
Yeah, remember Jay? It was the head of Fastenal, Bob Kierlin. We got to know Bob Kierlin because Bob Kierlin was a good friend of Schumacher's, safe from Winona. And I got to know Bob, and Bob's first wife, who was now deceased, Stephanie, was a wonderful dancer, and she had a dance studio, and our oldest daughter, Lisa, took dance lessons from her. She'd go up there, and then, so we got to know him. And And then he has this big company, Fastenal, and he became one of our big donors. And he was down talking to Schumacher one day about something, and the doc he was talking to, oh, Jay, the room that's by the center, our previous head of medical education.
Ross room.
Ross room, yeah. Ross was pediatric surgeon, so he had to go out, and he comes back in, and Bob says, "What's that? What's that all about?" He said, "Oh, we got this little baby child down in Prairie du Chien," and Bob said, "Well, wouldn't it be nice if you could just show him on video or something like that?" And he said, "Well, yeah, but that costs a lot of money." And I said, "Well, give me a proposal." So a couple of weeks later, we called him and said, "It's really a lot of money." He said, "Oh, I kind of thought that." And I don't know what it first cost Jay to run the line up to Winona, but that was the start of our whole thing. When we did the East building, we were going to ask him for a donation. I went up to have lunch with him, told him what we wanted, and he said, "Next time, just call me on the phone, tell you what you want, and save the money for lunch." He's pretty down to earth, isn't he, Jay? He literally drove the used brown Chevrolet, and his wife drove the red Ferrari.
Yeah.
And then his wife died, and a couple of years later, he married the comptroller for the city of Winona. I went to their wedding, and she's just a lovely woman. And now they've gotten into this artwork. And have you been up to the Marine Museum?
Oh, yes.
That's his baby. I asked him, I said, "How much are you going to continue to do with this?" He said, "Till the money runs out." His goal is to make that the nicest museum between Chicago and Minneapolis. Remarkable guy, but quiet.
Quiet.
Yeah, he has the BK 5K, the Bob Kierland 5K run every year. So I've occasionally gone up, and he and I will run together. We don't run very fast. We had this little boy one time. He was about 12. He had his shoestrings untied. And he was beating us. We kept trying to step on him so he wouldn't beat us across the finish line, but he did. But that's what the foundation work is all about. It's relationship, long-term relationships with people. And then the patients and major donors then would use the foundation as ways. They're not dummies, well, if I've given you $1 million, then maybe I can get. They would not ask for special care, just that they would get a chance to do things. And then, like Charles Gillette, he said, "No, I'll pay for it. I just want to have the doors opened." And we wouldn't be a 501c3 organization. Maybe you knew that story because of Charles Gillette. Did you know that story? How he went to Chicago and appeared before.
No. Yeah, tell it.
Yeah, well, the clinic at the time wanted to become a 501c3 organization, and IRS was challenges at the time. Charles was actually running the Gunderson Foundation at the time, along with Ed Overholt. And so they had to appear in Chicago before Judge Doyle, whose son became governor. Well, Charles told me the story years later because it was never published. Nobody knew that Charles Gillette and Judge Doyle were on the State Board of Regents in Wisconsin at the same time. They went to Wisconsin at the same time, and they were 180 degrees apart on a political spectrum. But they were on the board together. They got to know each other, and they respected each other. So Charles is presenting the case on why we should be considered a 501c3 tax-free. And so the judge says, "Mr. Gillette, your foundation has a board of directors, right?" "Yes, sir, we do." "You have a student body?" "Yes, we do." "You have a core curriculum?" "Yes, we do." "You have a faculty?" "Yes, we do." "How much control does your foundation board have over the curriculum and the faculty?" What was the third thing I just said? Curriculum and the student body. And Charles said, "Your Honor, my board has as much control over the faculty, the curriculum, and the student body as the State Board of Regents in Wisconsin has control over the faculty, the student body, and the curriculum." And the judge looked at him and said, That's a perfect answer, Mr. Gillette. That's a perfect answer. And he ruled for us, and he gave 10 ways he thought the IRS would challenge his ruling, and then rebutted each one of those. The IRS never challenged his ruling, so it was in our favor. But this was when the interest rates were 16%, 17%. We'd been paying our taxes all along on this, so the judge instructed them to pay the money back plus the interest. They only gave us part of the money. So Charles had to contact the judge and say, they've only given us part of the money back. Do you think you can help us again? And he wrote a scathing letter to the head of the IRS saying, you give them the rest of the money or you will appear in my court. And we got our money back. Never been published, unpublished story. Things that happen like that.
What was the amount?
In the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
I thought that.
Yeah. So we became 501c3. And now the thing is, well, since we're 501c3, the clinic's not, who should absorb who? Should the foundation absorb the clinic? Or should the clinic absorb the foundation? Well, it turned out that the foundation was absorbed by the clinic. And I forget who was running it at the time, but that's how it ended up. And see, I wanted the foundation, and when the foundation merged with the Lutheran Hospital Foundation, I wanted it completely independent with its own board and everything. And the reason why I wanted it, but Phil Dahlberg wouldn't go for it. He said, we just can't do that, Mark. You can't completely separate it from the clinic and Lutheran Hospital. And the reason I wanted it was, I said, well, Phil, if we don't structure it properly, there's no use in the foundation having a board of directors, because you get these nice people from the community to serve on a board, and they'll say, well, why my vote doesn't count for anything? Because you've got the board for the whole organization. That's the big board. They're the one that make all the decisions. Why should I give time to the foundation? So when we structured it, we do have it in there, and it's still in there, that if Gunderson Health wants to use foundation funding as collateral, they have to come and ask the foundation board of directors if they can do it. And the first time it did come up, there was going to be a building project, and Phil and Lutheran came to us at the foundation and said, we'd like to use your funds for bonding to get a better bonding rate and all this. Would you allow us to do this? Nick Train was on the board at the time, and so Nick put us in touch with some attorneys that were special at this down in Madison, and it took them several months to determine that we should do it. And so we could recommend to the board, and we did it. But I was proud of the fact that, one, Dahlberg honored his commitment that we'll ask you every time, rather than just assuming you'll let us do this. And then my board then has a feeling that, well, we do have some say in how things are running. Otherwise, don't need a board.
Yeah.
I don't want to. And some days now, Jay probably notices, is now they've got the foundation just kind of as under a line item. It's really not that way. The real structure legally is Gunderson Health System and still the foundation, and they have all these connections in between. But somehow, with time and new leadership, the foundation moves under one of those things. And sometimes you fight a losing battle trying to do that, but history.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a particular memory of both your practice and the foundation that stands out as one of your best achievements? There's so many.
No, I really have to think about that. The fact that we really were able to raise so much money for this new hospital in a small community. But it's really the people in the development office that do all that. That was their job. They were good at it. And then we had local people in the community, the Webbers, Reinhardts, that really supported us. I don't want to forget anybody's name. Jay, what's the big road construction company? The Matthews.
Mm-hmm.
The Matthews, this would not be published really, but they always did things behind the scenes because they were such strong supporters for males. But you build relationships and got to know the Matthews pretty well, and Mrs. Matthew, and then they became better. Ernie Misek, I don't know if you know Ernie.
Mm-hmm.
Ernie Misek came here, and who's Ernie Misek? Ernie Misek was the CEO of Cargill, biggest privately owned company certainly in this country. I mean, it's huge. But he's from Wisconsin, worked his way up, became chairman of the board, was there, retired, moves to La Crosse. I met him in an intermission of play over at Viterbo. It's my first met this guy. And I thought, I really like him. I want to get him on my board. I better get him before St. Francis does. And so it was a month or so later, and I said to Phil Schumacher, I said, you go on. He winters out in Arizona. You go out and see him. I'll send you out there. Spend a couple of days with him, which he did, to get to know the foundation better. Then when he came back, I had him for lunch, and he and his wife and came in and said, would you join my board? And he said, you know, you really are a hard sell. He said, I'm going to do it. He said, the hardest thing for me is I've got to walk out the door and turn down St. Francis now. They want me to. So we got him first on our board. So, and he became a great donor and a good friend, Misek. There weren't many of the Cargill family members left, but he was still head of the committee that would still pick family members to go on the Cargill board. And we were visiting his home in Arizona. You don't realize, but the kitchen is like being inside a silo because he was raised on a farm. And you look up and here's this big thing. And so I went into his private office, and here's a picture of him looking in the distance, all in color, and his hand is on a globe. So you think of the symbolism, Cargill, all over the world, huge company,
Mm-hmm.
and his hand is on the globe for everything they control. But it all started down in Iowa,
Mm-hmm.
and then moved to La Crosse. And then they moved the company to Minneapolis when Wisconsin came in with state income tax. They thought they could avoid an income tax by moving to Minnesota, who also got income tax. It didn't make any difference at all. So that's how you get connections. And we had another major donor. We were down in Naples, and Phil knew this couple. He had gone to Winona, to St. Mary's. And then he ended up at Michigan State and was a very successful professor. Came up with a particular product which has been very successful. It's additive and probably helps with antibiotics, called lorcidin. And I remember having a mental thing with his name too. I'll think of it. And so we're down there, and it was a beautiful day, and Phil said, I'm supposed to drive up to Fort Myers to have lunch with him. But I'm kind of, I don't know, do you really think I should go? I said, you told the man, his wife, you were coming, you go. Got to go up there and have day. He came back with a $2 million donation. Relationships.
Mm-hmm.
He hit it at the right time. This man wanted to make a $2 million donation to Michigan State. So we sent him the letter that he wanted to do all this, and he got a letter back saying, and he had been a teacher there for 30 years, saying, we're glad that you enjoyed coming to school at Michigan State, and blah, blah, blah. It was a form letter, and he was so insulted. He said, I didn't go to school there. I taught there. So I'm going to take my $2 million, and who walks in the door? Phil Schumacher. Well, he had a heart problem, too, and he'd been told that he only had a few months to live. So Phil says, why don't you come up to Gunderson? He comes up here, gets completely worked up. Julio puts a stent in. He lived another 3 years or so and did extremely well. So that became grateful. So then his wife has continued to be a big donor of the foundation. She's on the board now up at Winona, and she then had some health problems and called me one day and said, I'm having this terrible problem. And she said, what should I do? I said, you get on the airplane, you come back here. We'll have everything set up. I'll have everything arranged for who you have to see. And she didn't. She's been done extremely well herself, and so it's relationship, relationship, relationship. Yeah, and an occasional phone call. I don't know if any of this is
Yeah.
helpful or not.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, another point in case Ann Barney, was having problems when we were in Florida last winter, and she came back here.
Yeah, yeah. She's as I mentioned, we came back and we had been in to see somebody at the bank, and he, this was that first house, and he said, "How much is?" He said, "What are you making?" And I told him, and well, how much is that first house? And I told him what it was, and he said, "That's too much house for you. You can't afford a house like that." It was just a real put down. Well, our realtor was showing us around knew Bill. I didn't know Bill then. So she complained to Bill, and Bill called us and said, "You come see me tomorrow." So I went and he said, "That guy doesn't usually do real estate loans. Here's what I can do for you." And that was the beginning of our relationship with Bill and Ann Barney. Yeah, they became good friends. So it was, Jerry Cena was our real estate person at the time. And she said, "Oh," so she was the one that got us to see Barney, and she was the one that got us in to see Gerard. Now Gerard's daughter, who Nancy has said, "If you ever sell your house, I get first dibs on selling it." I said, "I owe you your family. You bet. We sell it. You'll take care of it for us." So.
Anything else that I have? I have a couple of other questions, but anything else that you wanna share?
No, just that how important the relations are that you, whether it's in the medical side or the foundation side, the people you work with make it all possible. And I had wonderful people on the medical side of things, but particularly on the foundation side. I was lucky. But a lot of the people were there a long time before I got there. Adolf was a good judge of character, and he hired all these people ahead of me. My last story with Adolf was he was really sick, and I went to see him on a Friday afternoon around noon, and Jenny was sitting by him, and I said, "Adolf, I have to go. I have to go to Minneapolis. Our granddaughter's having her first communion on Sunday." So I said, "I'll be back Sunday afternoon. I'll come see you." He said, "She's being raised in the faith." I said, "Yes, she is, Adolf." He said, "That's a good thing." That's the guy said, "Yes, that's a good thing. I'll see you Sunday afternoon." And he smiled and said, "Yes, Mark, I'll see you." He died the next day. We both knew that he wasn't going to be there when I got back on Sunday. We just, I don't want to end it on a drab note. He was a great mentor. He had a way with people. It doesn't mean he didn't have a temper at times. Yeah. And Jenny, she was a delight. She called me once and said, "You're the biggest ham I ever know." I said, "Not as big as you, Jenny." not as big as you. And I was in the office the day when Sarah lost their grandchild. And I came in that day, and he's sitting there, and his hands are like this, and he's got papers all over the desk. And I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. What are you doing?" He says, "Mark, I'm trying to write her obituary." I said, "Oh, we've got some. We'll make a call. We'll get somebody over here, a good wordsmith," and we did, that can help him write that. And he couldn't stand it. They didn't know what killed her. So he finally got a hold of the coroner up in, was it Vermont, Jay, or whatever it was?
Connecticut, I think.
Connecticut, and talked to him. And she had ruptured her aorta, so she had no chance at all.
No
chance. So, yeah. Next question.
Well, my last question would be one for more selfish reasons, and that is, with this whole interviewing process, how do you see that at some point will fit the mission of the foundation, or if the institution as a whole?
Well, people are interested in, well, first of all, I really believe in this whole idea of doing all this and the archiving of all this. I've been a great supporter of that. And when Jeff Thompson and I talked about this years ago, I said, we have to keep doing this. I said we had Alf Slungard, who did a lot of it. And Eric is real interested in all this, and that's a good thing. And now you become interested. So at the time I said, so let's go half and half on cost. And then I've lost track of all that. But it's because we both thought at the time that you've got to maintain the history of the place. And sometimes people read it and pay attention to it, but that's all we've got, and we should maintain it. So I think it's kind of neat that you're interviewing all the different, and I can tell you this, all that, because we have a Thursday lunch group gets together, and you've talked to a lot of the people, and they all look forward to it, and they enjoy talking to it, and then you better be ready because she's going to have a lot of questions. And but everybody has different stories, and boy, I'd hate to have it all lost. It's a unique place. That's why my chief at Iowa, I've never seen any place like this, Gunderson Place. They just expect you to take care of patients, and they take care of everything else.
Right.
You don't have to worry about hiring and firing and all that. Everything's taken care of for you. Just, in our library system, just make a phone call and you can review things like that have been done. Medical media, boy, it's people at other places just don't understand it. I became close with a guy down in New Orleans. Jack Anderson was his name, very famous in our areas, facial plastics guy, and I invited him up to come up. I said, okay, so he came up, and this was when, who was it that had he was a gourmet cook, and he cooked in the family home on the top of the hill. White Way.
Yeah.
So I called Lee, and I said, I'm bringing this really famous guy up. He's going to lecture, and I'm bringing him up, bringing the whole department for dinner. I can't have any screaming in the kitchen tonight, and the pots and pans and all. It's got to be a good night. So, okay, I promise. So this guy, Anderson, comes up, and we had a gourmet meal. And Lee came out and played the piano between courses. And so I would see this guy at a meeting. And then I took him down to medical photography. And I said, I want you to get your picture taken down here. And he called back when I had it and said, I want the negative. He said, I'm going to give this to all my residents. I've never had such a nice picture taken. So I did. And I would see him, he said, I thought when I was going to go to La Crosse, Wisconsin, I'd get meat and potatoes. What do I get? A gourmet meal in somebody's home. And the chef comes out and plays beautiful music for him on his piano. He said, I never had such a night like that. And I said, that's La Crosse. We do this all the time. So how did I get off on that? Jack Anderson.
Well, we sure appreciated you coming in. Really enjoyed the visit.
Good, thank you. I hope I didn't ramble too much.
Absolutely not.
Try to touch on some highlights on
Yes.
things. And
Yeah.
But about this interviewing all the people, I don't know how you're going to put it all together, or if you'll just put it into a single. What are you going to do?
Well, the plan would be when the history wall is finished in the legacy hallway across from the display cases, there'll be I always forget what they call it, a video monitor. And so certain clips will run through that, and also there'll be the ability to pick out a specialty or a name, and that would be at the time when things are edited. You won't be running the whole interview, but something will come up. And then the Bridges about 3 weeks ago, I ran the story about Dr. Clemens and the ear, and he was right. I mean, he wanted to put the pictures of the before and after, and the editor of Court or Bridges is, well, I don't know, we want this to be kind of a small thing. Well, it wouldn't have done any justice without the picture of the before and after. And eventually when you're looking at that online, you'll be able to click and you get the sound bite, or maybe even the part of the video of that particular interview. So I have Dr. Morgan and Dr. Kaplan now are writing a little segment, or I'll write it up and give it to them, to edit, so that we now will start continuing that, so that people are aware that we are doing these interviews. And I know Sue LaCrosse for Doctor's Day looked at the interviews of the first, I think, 5 that we interviewed, or 4, Elston being the first one, and then picked out a quote from each one and had their pictures up. And so what happens after we do the interview is then Jay sends me, makes a copy that we give unedited to the physician, and then I'll probably do this when I'm in Florida. Maybe we'll get together for dinner and we can, and anyway, so I can look at it. But then I make the mark for the time segment that is related to the particular subjects that I'm asking with the questions, so that if somebody wants to pluck something from the interview, they know where to go within the sequence of things.
Wow.
Yeah, and there's probably even more uses. I asked the question because it's a time consuming process, but I see the value of it. I mean, it's very rewarding to me, especially
Yeah.
because you're the group of physicians that I worked with,
Yeah.
and but there's the question of, okay, you're part time. What are you supposed to be doing? And
Well, it's still a wonderful thing.
yeah,
And Ben Elson, did he do any of his sounds, any of his animal sounds for you? Or didn't get into all that.
He actually did.
He did?
did he do a sound?
Yeah, at the end. Yeah.
Oh, I tell you, he's a character.
Yeah.
I suppose we can conclude the video.
Okay.